Hello, Garland Nixon here, and what we're going to talk about now is the neocons' plan to win a war that they've already lost. Let's talk. I guess we ain't going to talk. Hold on. What the hell's going on here? I've got it. My little countdown video. It's supposed to be on. Well, you know what? I have been had here. I got a countdown video. Everybody knows this. I have a 30-second countdown video. And what it allows me to do is to get started on, that's weird. Well, I'll put it like this. Let's not trifle all of our time with the countdown video. It's coming on and off, but it's not showing on and off for me. So let's move forward. Oh, I got to try it one more time. Okay, that's good enough. This damn countdown video is driving me crazy. So we're not going to do countdown videos today, but at least I got it figured out. So what was happening was I'd click on the countdown video and apparently it was showing for you guys, but it wasn't showing for me. So I'm like, what's going on? And you know, I'm a very much a creature of habit, right? I'm one of these people who I do a lot of stuff that I do the same thing, the same way every time. Everything has to be like certain things have to be a certain way in certain place. And I get freaked out if it's different. There's a word for that. But at any rate, OCD maybe about certain things. At any rate, so we got our countdown video out of the way, and let's talk. And the other thing is this: because of patterns like that, somebody like me, I'm used to that pattern. Then I do my show; it could actually throw off my show. So let's hope it doesn't. No, let's not even talk about that. Let's talk about what we're getting at, and that is an off ramp from Ukraine. That discussion has been had for a long time, but in the West, but I'll put it like this: mostly where you hear about an off ramp for Ukraine, it has to do with Russia, right? Putin, of course, there's no such country as Russia. Understand that there is no such country as Russia. Russia does not exist. What we usually hear is an off ramp for Putin, because in the West, keep in mind, in the U.S. empire, there are no countries when it comes to adversaries. What you must do is you must focus on the leader of the country. You must transform that person into some kind of a demon, an evil person, a leader. He's hurting his own people. So now you're there to protect his own people, to bring them democracy and look out for the trans LGBT, YouTube, BIPOC, whatever the hell you can come up with to bamboozle your people into your people into following it. So there's no such thing as Russia. There's only Putin. So let's talk about Putin's off ramp, right? Putin needs an off ramp. Well, from the looks of things, here's the way it's going. Doesn't look like Putin's looking for an off ramp. Doesn't look like Putin's like the Russian leadership are like, hey, how can we get an off ramp? They have made it clear. If we get we told you what we want. Most of Americans have no clue that in December of 2021, I don't know what the hell kind of year it is. The Russians sent a document to the U.S. empire and said, look, we're going to have problems in Ukraine. There could be, quote, military technical response if we don't talk about the following issues about our security, right? To which the U.S. and EU was, oh, please. And in fact, Stoltenberg even basically said Russia doesn't have a veto. You can't decide. In other words, here was the position of NATO. No one outside of NATO can decide who joins or who does not join NATO. Sorry, Russia, China, etc. And so what were they really saying? NATO is an imperialist war machine, a tool of the U.S. empire. And what they were really saying is only the U.S. empire controls our war machine, our imperialist tool. Keep in mind something when you talk about NATO that goes further. Even the EU doesn't have any input. And they're part of NATO. No one, what the U.S. empire was really saying is the EU doesn't have any input. The people in D.C. on Capitol Hill, in the U.S. State Department, the neocons, etc., we're the ones that wield NATO as a worldwide military weapon. We're the ones that decide what it does, where it goes. Nobody else has any input. The Russians, the Chinese, the Europeans, nobody. This is decided. This was the But bottom line was when the Russians in 2019 sent a list of demands, they wanted, and it was, we got to have a talk about our security on our border. The US looked at it and said, you are challenging the US empire's hegemony over the world. You are saying we got to talk to you about security on your border. When reality, number one, in reality, the US empire's position is we're going to destroy you and overthrow you anyway. And this is the tool we're using. NATO is the tool that we're using to destroy Russia, to tear Russia apart, and to steal all your stuff. So why would we listen to you? You know what I mean? It's like you point a gun at a guy to stick him up, and you say, I'm pointing this gun at you, give me your money. And the guy says, we got to talk about that gun, man. That thing's pointed at me, and somebody could get hurt, and it would be me. And the criminal laughs at him. He says, you don't understand. I'm a stick-up artist, and this is the tool that I use to stick people up. Nobody but me as a stick-up artist is going to be able to discuss how this tool is used, especially you, because it's pointing at you. And you say, look, I find it kind of threatening that you're pointing that gun at me. And he says, oh, no, 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 no. You're misinterpreting this whole situation, the dynamic of the situation. Fair enough, there's a gun pointing at you, but it's a defensive gun. Just in case you don't want to give me your money, you don't want to hand over your wallet, just in case you don't want to cooperate with this robbery, then I'll defensively use this gun to shoot you between the eyes. That's the defensive stance of NATO. Pointing a gun at someone to rob them. We know what NATO wants to do. They've said it. They want to destabilize Russia. They want to take all of Russia's stuff. NATO is the gun. And Russia wants to talk about this weapon pointed at them. And the US empire says, we're stick-up artists, dude. I mean, stick-up artists can't give up the gun. What are we going to stick people up with if we don't have a gun? And Russia's like, that's precisely our point. Right? So here's the point. So in the very beginning of this discussion, I've already taken us. I can go home now. I mean, I'm already home, but you get the picture. I can shut this thing down. I've made the point. That's the entire point of this thing. How can there be a discussion of an off ramp? How can there be a discussion of the negotiation between a robber and a robbery victim about the weapon that's used? If the robber uses a blunt object, hey, I got this big club I'm going to hit you in the head with if you don't give me your money. Or a knife, hey, I'm going to stick you with this edged weapon if you don't give me your money. And then the robbery victim says, I'd like to talk about this tool you're using to threaten me. The robber ain't giving up the tool. And there we go. No off-ramp in NATO. But there is and I've talked about this before, there is in fact an issue here with NATO. There's a major issue that NATO has, that the leaders, the neocons are caught. The ruling elite of France are caught, of Europe are caught in this little pocket. If you listen to me talk, you've heard me discuss it before, but for those who haven't, I'll talk about it now. Between their rhetoric and their intent, the rhetoric is, we want to protect Europe from Russia, and Russia is threatening Europe. So we're protecting Russia from a threat. That is the rhetoric. But where is their intent? Their intent is, let me see something and I'll find it for you. And that is Rand. Give me 1 second. Okay, let's go here. Let's look at their intent. Their intent, overextending and unbalancing Russia. This is the Rand Corporation. This is paid for by the US government, by the Pentagon, right? You go down it and they talk about what they want to do. They want to do economic cost imposing measures, impose deeper trade and financial sections, blah, 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 right? Geopolitical cost measures, right? And look, what do they show? Pictures of the Syrian SDF, pictures of, so what are they saying? They're talking about making cost imposing measures on Russia, but what do they show? Pictures of their proxies in the Middle East. We use proxies to go after our enemies. They tell you right there, we're going to hurt Russia. And what are we going to use? We're going to use proxies the same way and what do we know? Providing lethal aid to Ukraine. Now, I want to put these things together. In this Rand Corporation 2019 statement, as it were, it's not an accident that at the same time they say geopolitical cost imposing measures, they show a picture of their proxies in the Middle East that used to destabilize Syria or the entire Middle East. And look at this, providing lethal aid to Ukraine, imposing support to the Syrian rebels. Again, what is it? It is using proxies. We're going to use these Syrian proxies in Syria to destabilize Russia there and their allies there, right? And this is what we do, proxies, right? So they sit down, ideological and informational cost imposing measures. Look at this diminishing faith in the Russian electoral system. Yeah, well, that backfired. Creating the perception that the regime is not pursuing the public well, that backfired. On and on. Undermining Russia's image of, well, that backfired. Everything they're doing is hurting the U.S. But my point is this. Here's the point I'm getting at. There is, between their rhetoric, we're here for democracy. We're here to help the Ukrainian people, save them, to stop Russia from blah, 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 blah. But their real motivation is to take out Russia, to destabilize Russia, to do regime change in Russia, and to steal Russia's stuff. Therefore, the off-ramp would be available if they really were concerned about Ukraine and the Ukrainian people and all the things that they claim. If their rhetoric was honest, was genuine, was real, it would not be difficult to find an off-ramp. You just say to Russia, this is what I want. We want democracy and we want to save the Ukrainian people and blah, 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 blah. And Russia would say, this is what we want. You get a deal. But because it's a front, see, the real reason you can't have an off-ramp, this is it. The real reason you cannot have an off-ramp in Russia is because the U.S. empire is lying about what it's trying to get out of Russia, because it knows it can't tell the truth. The neocons know that they can't just go, all right, let's go on TV all over Europe. Here's the plan, guys. Destabilize, screw you and your friggin' security. Europe, we don't care about that. In fact, the things that we're doing is actually going to make your security much less. It's going to make your borders much less secure. We are ramping up wars on your area. We're supporting extremists and fascists. We're pumping arms like the world has never seen before into your region. Certainly, those things are going to destabilize your region and make you much less safe. But we think it's a reasonable thing to do. Number one, we're a long ways away and it ain't going to hurt us. We ain't going to be less safe. Number two, we're trying to destabilize Russia at your expense. And last but not least, Europe, I don't know if you guys have been paying attention. We're deindustrializing you idiots, and we're going to steal all of your industry, and we're going to take you to the cleaners and rob you blind. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, come on. We're selling you LNG gas at 5 times the price. Take a hint, guys. Take a hint. You are road pizza. We're going to screw you over. We're going to do the same thing to you that we're doing to Russia. You might want to read John Bolton's book, where he points out that the neocons see the Europeans as behind China as the next economic threat, because Europe is a giant economic trading bloc, and the U.S. will have none of that. Instead, Europe is going to be an impoverished schmucks, a bunch of impoverished schmucks who they feed off of their carcasses as they destabilize, deindustrialize, and impoverish the entire continent. And that's the plan. So can they come out and say, let's get a deal with Russia? No, the off-ramp was closed and is closed because the neocons, the U.S. empire, is lying about what it wants to get out of this. And of course, it wants to make lots of money, whether it's selling weapons to these poor schlubs in Europe, or whether it wants to make money or destroy Russia. So there is no off-ramp. There's no possibility for an off-ramp. There never was. So what we're looking at now is the problem. Here's the problem that the U.S. empire is running into. How do you win a war that you've already lost? See, the discussion between basically the U.S., the neocons, and you can include their puppets in Europe. The neocons came out in this thing and said, "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to start this, kick off this war, and we're going to take out Russia. Hooray! Russia's going to go down." Right? They started the war. Russia didn't go down, but since they don't live in the land of reality, you probably heard me say this. The neurotics build castles in the sky. Psychotics live in them. Right? Bottom line is these people are psychotics. They're sociopaths. So they made up their mind that Russia was going to lose this war. And come hell or high water, they're going to act as though Russia's lost. So they basically had all of the rhetoric to their people. Hey, Russia's going to lose. They'll be defeated. Oh my gosh, they're down to fighting with shovels and they're literally picking up washing machines, throwing them at the enemy. There's no chance Russia's going to win. They fed that propaganda to all of their citizens because they had to, because they had to believe it. It has to be true. I'll never forget. I heard a person say something to me that as long as I live, I will never forget these words. And there was an argument, and one person in the argument stated a fact that was, pretty obvious. And the other person said, in the face of irrefutable evidence, the person said these words: "I refuse to believe that." That didn't mean it wasn't true. 100% true. They couldn't argue that it wasn't true. The evidence was overwhelming, but what they said was, "I refuse to believe that." That wasn't about whether the argument was true or false, was it? It was about the person who was listening to the argument saying, in the universe that I live in, if I believe that, I got problems. Everything falls apart. The foundation of my belief is X. If X ain't true, then I just disappear. I just fade off. Like when in Star Trek, when they shoot somebody with a phaser and they turn into a white fuzzy thing and disappear, right? If I believe that to be true, I just turn into a white fuzzy space and disappear. Can't happen. Refuse to believe that. There's the neocons. Now, that is a pathological, from a psychiatric perspective, that's a pathological way of viewing the world, to say when I run into empirical evidence, when I run into incontestable, rhetorically unassailable data, I'm just going to say, man, that's a tough one there, huh? Okay, I just won't believe it. How about that? I'll just say, I don't believe that. It doesn't mean it ain't true. I can't believe it. So the neocons are in that pathological position of having to say, we don't believe it. And they got all of their people. Hey, Americans, Europeans, you all got that, right? The Russians are losing. Sure. The problem that they got is the Russians ain't losing. The problem they've got is they've created a Ukrainian bloodbath. What are they? The numbers are starting to be, what, 400,000 or 500,000? Look, the United States, what, 55,000 dead in 12 years, 8 years, how many years it was in Vietnam. And people are like, man, that's a lot of people. And that's a Wednesday afternoon on the battlefields of Ukraine, for God's sake. Like, literally, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in the vicinity, upwards of 50,000 people died in like July. You ain't going to have a lot of Ukrainians left doing that, but they don't really care. And that's what the Ukrainians are there for, as far as the neocons are concerned. So bottom line is, the neocons successfully, with their information, you can call it a war or whatever, their information plans, convinced themselves and convinced everybody they needed to that Russia was losing. Now, I'm sure there are people around them that said, no, they're not, but they probably just like, well, okay, we can't really work with that, dude. Yeah, but the Russians really aren't losing. Hey, man, don't make me fire you. You're not allowed to say that. If an analyst were to come in from the CIA and say, I got information, okay, what is it? The Russians ain't losing. Go send that guy back to Langley. There's no place amongst these ideologues for reality. So that being said, now that this is the war has happened, the conflict has happened, they know for a fact that the Russians are going to win. They lose. They convince their people that the Russians are going to lose, and now they got to act like this. Again, my question: how do you win a war that you've already lost? Now they got to talk about how to execute this victorious win. What are they going to do? Well, we got the upper hand, so let's go. And here's what they do. Let's first talk to our allies, right? All right. And so they get together and they huddle up and they say, look, clearly Russia's in deep and serious trouble. They lost this war. They got hours, minutes, seconds left before Russia collapses, before the Azov battalion is sticking up their Waffen SS flag in Red Square. So look, the Russians, do you think they're going to beg for mercy? Are they going to drop to their knees and cry and ask us to get off their backs? And then we'll just say no. We'll say no, give us up, give up the gold, give up the gas, give up the oil, give it all up. What do you think? So they sit down and they negotiate amongst themselves as though they won the war, because in their universe, there's no room for a reality where they didn't. So they talk about it. What do you think we should do? Well, we'll just freeze the conflict. Certainly the Russians will accept that in their reality, because the Russians are losing. Because they have to deal with each other as though they won. When they walk in a room, it's the emperor has no clothes. Nobody can say the emperor has no clothes. So when they all walk in and Joe Biden says, look, clearly the Russians are winning, they come, oh yeah, losing, the Russians are losing. And since they're losing, we may need to work out a deal. Yeah, let's work out a deal of how the Russians are losing. Okay, let's go to the Russians and we'll offer them a peanut butter sandwich and the bumper off an old 87 Buick. And they'll take it because, let's face it, they're losing. They're down to shovels and washing machines. What are they going to do? Yeah, the Russians will take them for sure because they're down to shovels and so they talk amongst each other in this false reality about how bad the Russians are losing. And, people like me or Duran or let me change this. Anybody who's got a brain in their head looks at it and says, guys, yeah, it's a brilliant plan you got there, but there's one minor issue: context. There's context here. Your plan would work if it weren't for the fact that it can't possibly work. Your plan wouldn't work if the Russians were losing, but they ain't. The Ukrainians, you're going to have a country, what's left of the men in the country are going to have all of their arms and legs blown off, and there ain't going to be many. So you're going to have a country where there's women and children, there's a few guys with their arms and legs blown off, and the rest of the men are dead. That's basically what you're looking at. The guys that are left are going to be blind. They're going to be in wheelchairs. They're going to be arms and legs blown off. That's what you're going to have. A nice big country, lots of stuff there. But the guys other than, the eastern part, which is now Russia, the people that left ain't going to be happy. They're not going to be out tap dancing or joining a ballet company by any stretch of the imagination, because they'll have no feet and they'll have no legs. Is that really the direction that you think this conflict is going? That's going to take you to victory? But as long as there's Ukrainians left, they can continue this thing, because they can continue to throw them into the face of Russian artillery, and of course you can make this thing go on. So you continue this thing on. So the one of the main issues is not just because a lot of people bring this point up that the U.S. empire and its vassals are negotiating amongst themselves without involving the Russians, right? That's part of the problem. It would be a problem anytime you're having a peace negotiation without the other entity. The other part of it is that in what they are discussing, they got to pretend that the Russians are losing, and they're not. So they're trying to talk about how to negotiate an end to a conflict that they have won when they've lost. So even at some point, when they come to the Russians at some point and say, we want to talk, and the Russians say, well, we don't trust you, but go ahead. All right, we've come up with your term, we negotiated your terms of surrender. All you got to do is sign them. And the Russians are going to say, sure, just a second, we'll be right back. Slam. And they're going to slam the phone down and carry on. Because there is no room in the neocon universe for a Russian victory. But there is no room in the universe that the rest of us live for in a Russian loss, because we live in a physical world. We live in don't get me wrong. I understand people who say the whole universe is spiritual and look at we were looking at the universe creates it and we're collapsing waves and yes, yeah, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with all of that stuff. I think there's a certain element of reality to it. Yes, the universe is based on the things that we can conceive and blah 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 blah. Sure, right. But in the reality that we can conceive, in the reality, in the dimension that we can conceive, Ukrainians are losing. They're getting their arms and legs blown off, for God's sake. You can do all the philosophical discussions about quantum theory all you want to, the Heisenberg principle. You can talk all of that stuff you want to. Fine. We cannot possibly know the speed and the location of a particle at the same time. Fair enough. But the Ukrainians are still getting their arms and legs blown off. We can know the speed and location of a piece of an artillery as it rips through the bodies of Ukrainian soldiers. So the reality is, in the physical world as we understand it, this thing's over. Except until they run out of Ukrainians, and whether or not the U.S. empire can influence Poles and Romanians to go in and get their arms and legs blown off remains to be seen. But the U.S. empire wants regime change. Let me say something about regime change. If there is regime change in the air, I'll use that, where will regime change show up, right? Like if we look at regime change, like, the infamous guy with the death of harbinger of death, with the black cape and the sickle and the bony skeleton face and all of this guy that runs around, and you see the memes. He's knocking on your door. You open the door. Oh my God, it's death. You slam the door and he's, coming after you, right? You want to avoid death, and death is an actual entity that chases you around, right? Let's just turn that into regime change. And there you go. Well, in reality, death is more likely, unless we get auto accident or something, to find, let's say I got a really, really bad heart and I'm standing next to a guy who's an Olympic runner. Death is more likely to find me because I got heart issues, or I got some health issues, I got some form of cancer, I got whatever, right? I got something that already enfeebles my body to some extent, and there's a guy next to me who is a world-class athlete who runs and eats healthy and all that stuff every day, and he's 19, 20 years old, right? Death is more likely to find me first. So the question is, who is this regime change guy that's running around? He looks just like death, but instead of death, he's got the word regime change across his little black uniform, right? His black, whatchamacallit. Regime change is going to find the sickest governments first, isn't it? In the same way that death's going to find the sickest person first. If I'm 85 years old and I'm standing next to a kid that's 15, it's theoretically possible that kid could die before me. A boulder could drop right out of the sky on it, right? But the probabilities are overwhelming. If I'm 85 and he's 15, then I'm going to die. The death is going to find me first, right? Okay. If regime change is looking around for its next victim, what's it going to find? The country with the weakest government. See, what the U.S. empire is trying to do is it's trying to enact a regime change. It's trying to push regime change on someone, saying we're going to make regime change here through our machinations. Regime change is floating around saying, ain't happening, dude. I'm going to find who I'm going to find. And look so it's going to find the government with the most tenuous grip on power. It's going to find the weakest government. So if regime change is searching around, it's going to go to Russia and say, Putin's got 85% approval rating. No work for us here. It's going to go to China, for God's sake, 90% approval rating for the government in China. Ain't no work for me here. Then it's going to go back to the EU, and it's going to say, oh, for God's sake, looky, what do we have here in Germany? Olaf Scholz has got, a 0.0001% approval rating. Oh, Rishi Sunak, how's things going? Macron. Good old Joe Biden. He may not know what the hell's going on, but his approval rating is sinking faster than the Titanic. So what's going to happen? There will be regime change, no question. But the regime change will find its way to the weakest governments. And the weakest governments ain't in Russia and China, ain't in Iran, not in Venezuela or Cuba, not in Nicaragua. Those governments are very strong. They're strong central governments. In fact, one may argue that the US empire or any empire would feel most threatened by governments that have the strongest grip on power. The countries with the strongest central governments, Russia, China, Iran, Nicaragua, Cuba, they have strong central governments. So countries that have strong central governments are the ones that piss the US off the most. Why is that? Because oftentimes a country with a strong central government is trying at least to align itself with its people ideologically, to align itself with its people maybe economically, things of that, maybe religiously, spiritually, things of that nature, maybe is traditions, maybe a government saying, look, the people in this country have certain religious traditions, family traditions, things like that. And as a government, we're going to align ourselves with the traditions of the people. That's going to help strengthen the government. The people will say, I believe in whatever the case may be, or I don't believe in whatever the case may be. The government's not going to try to say, we're going to give you a new set of traditions and values and things. It's going to say, we're going to align ourselves with the ones that you have. That's going to be a strong part of the dynamic for a strong central government. Wherein in the West, what we've got is a bunch of countries saying, we've got to lead you to a new set of moral and ethical and values and principles. And whether you like it or not. And by the way, if you don't like it, we're going to call you all kinds of names. And we're going to stomp you, beat you over the head. We're going to close your bank accounts. Your life is not going to be fun if you don't do what the hell you're told. And so you have that causes the country to have a more tenuous grip on power, because to be lesser of a strong central government, because the government is morally or ethically or from a value perspective, from an economic perspective, etc., at odds with its people. A lot of people in America, other than the brainwashed zombies now, are asking the right question. Why in the hell are we spending all this money for Ukraine? When in fact, we've got Hawaii, we've got now the brainwashed zombies are like, we've got to spend money for Ukraine because, of course, they're going to believe the rhetoric. We're saving democracy and looking out things for good people and stopping Putin and all these kinds of things. But those who know what's going on know it's all a lie. All they need, those who believe, you know what they'll do? Those who are on the other end of the information sphere will look at this and say, overextending and unbalancing Russia. And well, that was written in 2019. Let me look down at providing lethal aid to Ukraine. Hey, you bastards. You're lying to us. You told us one thing, and in reality, you've been plotting on Russia for years. You've been plotting on how you're going to take Russia apart for years. And what do you know? Now you finally got it, and you're lying to us, telling us it's about goody things and saving the world and democracy, and we're on to you. Okay. Let me say this. Here's the other issue of why the off-ramp is closed. A big discussion about this conflict is whether or not it's existential, and to whom, right? Is it existential to Russia? Well, clearly. I mean, if you understand the historical context here, 1812, 14, whatever it was, in the early 1800s, the French and led by Napoleon did their attack on where they're going to take Russia out. They're going to take Russia once and for all. Didn't work so well. 100 years later or so, the Germans decide it's our turn. We're taking Russia. Didn't work so well. Now we got another, every 100 years or so, the West gets froggy and says, we got to go take Russia. And they get their ass sent back home with their feelings hurt. Happens every 100 years. The Russians really should plan for it. They should start planning for the year 3000 and, excuse me, what is it? What is it? 30, what is it? This is year 21, 23, somewhere around that. They got to start setting up for the next war, because every 100 years, the West is like, hey, let's go take out Russia. Man, they got a lot of oil and all kinds of stuff. Let's get it. And the Russians send their asses back home crying with their tail between their legs. So that's the 100-year thing that happens every 100 years. And so that's what's going down. But the neocons, so this is the idea. If you look at that, they want to take out Russia. Is it existential to Russia? It certainly is. This is the neocons surrounding Russia with bases, saying we're going to take Russia. We're going to get rid of their leader, who has an 85% approval rating, which is the very definition of thwarting the will of the people. It is the opposite of democracy. In fact, Putin's Vladimir Putin's party, the political party that he leads, just had a bunch of major victories. And the West is like, oh my God, there's a suspect that it's really suspicious. And we think that there's something really fishy about these elections. Really? The guy who's got an 85% or 80 over 80% approval rating, I don't know the exact number today, his party won big. Yeah, how'd that happen? What a shock that a leader with an 80% approval rating, that his party would have some success in the at the voting booth. That's pretty shocking. So Russia, yeah, existential. Europe, no, hell no. Well, it is, but it isn't. Here's what I mean. It's the opposite of existential for Europe. In fact, that if what's existential for Europe is this conflict. If this conflict shuts down and they come up with a deal with Russia, which Russia wants, where the security needs of both Europe and Russia is screw the United States, it's taken into account, Europe will be better off. So it's actually the opposite of existential to Europe. Who is it really existential for? The neocon project. The people for the new American centuries, the Kagan-led psychotic neocon cabal, right? It is existential for them because they're, remember the Wolfowitz doctrine, right? Their plan, such as it is, their plan is to rule the world. And in order to do that, they got to take out any country that could possibly threaten their complete hegemonic global domination. And of course, Russia's threatening that. Russia's saying, hey, man, we're going to have a multipolar world. Ain't nothing you can do about it. The multipolar world is here. And in fact, it is. So for the neocons, they've got a double dilemma. Dilemma one is that they have to pretend, they have to try to get the outcome that from the Ukraine conflict that they would have gotten if they've won, but they haven't won. Number two, they've got to hold on to a multipolar world and continue their global domination. I mean, to a unipolar world and continue their global domination and to stop a multipolar world. I hope I didn't say multipolar twice. I meant unipolar to multipolar, right? And it's the same dynamic because we already have a multipolar world. China and Russia, India, Africa, the Middle East, these countries are exerting their independence. They're no longer under the boot of the U.S. empire. So is it existential? Yes, because the neocons are doing the same thing twice. They're trying to pretend that they won a war that they're losing. They're trying to pretend that they still have hegemonic unipolarity over a world that's already a multipolar. So they're living in a fantasy world. So is it existential to them? In a way, because both of these, here's the dynamic twice. At some point, I talked about in a previous video, at some point, the rubber meets the road. At some point, reality asserts itself. There will come a point when the West will have to face the reality that they lost. And at that, then see here, let me add something to this. There's a problem with the West facing the reality that they lost, because there is an additional lie going on here, right? And the lie is that the U.S. and the UK and NATO are not co-belligerents, that they're not part of the war, right? So if they're not co-belligerents and they're not part of the war, then they can't lose. They can't win. They can't lose. They're not. They're helping Ukraine, but whatever happens, they're not belligerents. The reality is that NATO and that the U.S. empire and its military tool and its vassals are co-belligerents, and I suspect that to lose, it forces the admission that they're co-belligerents, because at that point it becomes the war's lost. What you going to do? What you going to do now? Ukraine has lost. You gave them everything you could. You gave them you gave them the intelligence, surveillance, ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. You put troops on the ground and claimed there wasn't. You gave them missile after missile. You told them where everything that you could possibly do, and the Ukrainians lost. But you didn't lose because you're not co-belligerents, are you? It forces upon them the decisions of a co-belligerent. Hey, Ukrainians lost, you didn't lose, you lose, go at home. So to lose this conflict, to have to face the reality that they lost, also puts them in the position of having to, in a way, acknowledge that they're co-belligerents. Because at that point, what would they say if they're not co-belligerents? Darn, poor Ukraine, they lost. But instead, it's, hey, we can't have this discussion. What are we going to do? Instead, it's, how are we going to deal with this? And not Ukraine lost, but holy crap, what are we going to do? Because they already know, the world knows it. They're fooling themselves. The entire world, Africa, everybody's looking at it saying, you guys came after the Russians. And if they lose, the world's going to say, you guys came after Russians. Man, they kicked your ass. You brought in the most powerful, largest proxy army that the U.S. empire has ever seen. You loaded it and armed it to the gills, and it got bashed to pieces by the Russians. And you armed it again, and they crushed it again. And you armed it, and every single time you armed it, they turned it to rubble. The Russians, I've said it like this: the Russians created a trash compactor in Ukraine, and you just kept filling it with US, with Western weapons. And every time you filled it, they smashed it and said, send more. We ain't done. The world's looking at that. That's the view of the global South. That's the view a lot of the world of the Middle East. They're like watching what's going on. How can you view it another way? So to lose this means that basically the world knows you're co-belligerents. What it means is the world will look at it and say the US and NATO took on Russia and lost. That's a reality. But here's the problem. They've already taken on Russia and they've already lost. In the same way that the unipolar world is gone and we're in a multipolar world and the neocons are trying to hold on to it, they're in a war that they've already lost and they're trying to pretend as though they're winning it and as though they can negotiate from a position of power. They ain't going to be so in the end, they can't even negotiate at all. There's no room for their rhetoric. So as I've said all along, so what has to happen in the end is collapse. There's no area, there's no room. At some point, and I put it like this all along, if I'm the Russians, I keep bashing this thing to pieces. I bash Ukraine to pieces. As I'm the Russians, I'm not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent. I'm not doing a moral judgment on it. My position is I oppose war, and I want this thing to end as quickly as possible and to save lives. But they ain't going to listen to me. So I just have to evaluate what I see and say, from a strategic perspective, the Russians are going to say, if you got Ukraine, there ain't much left, and you ain't going to have much to work with, because we'll take what we want, and the rest is going to be, militarily, ain't going to be much left. And so you're going to have an economic disaster on your hands. Now, from the perspective of the neocons, they may look at it the same way. Hey, you know what? If and likely do, if Ukraine, if they can live in the realm of reality, it would be, hey, guess what? If the Russians are going to take it, we want to make sure there ain't much left for them to take. So we want Ukraine bashed to pieces anyway. In the same way that the neocons have recently said, on many occasions, not just recently, said, look, if China attacks Taiwan, we're going to blow up TSMC, and we may blow up some of other Taiwan. In other words, if the Chinese are going to have get Taiwan, we'll blow Taiwan to hell ourselves and make sure there ain't nothing much for them to get. Now, what kind of friend is like that? That's the neocons. You don't have a friend. So the neocons now, they're the ones out of this whole thing. Most people stand to gain from an end to the war. In reality, the Europeans stand to gain because maybe they can start doing business with the Russians again and save their economy, which they can. The rest of the world stands to gain because the people are afraid there could be a nuclear exchange and we could all die. So you hooray, everybody else does. And they could get around these ungodly sanctions and start doing business with ease again, and they could continue to build their multipolar foundation. So everybody stands to gain by ending this conflict through a negotiated settlement, except the neocons, because they're living in a world where they got to prevent a multipolar world where they got to hold on to power that they don't have anymore, and they will be exposed, and they're probably afraid they'll have to answer for it, particularly at the polls in the United States. This is an election year, and what happens if this thing falls apart during an election year, which looks like that's what's going to go on. This thing falls apart and collapses. Can they start World War II or III during an election year? Man, the people in America ain't going to be happy about that. And they wouldn't, because they'd all die in a nuclear exchange. But they're not in a position to do anything really, really dramatic that will really piss off the people here. So they got a problem, because on one side of the neocons is the Russian conflict. On the other side is, holy crap, what would happen if Trump or RFK Jr., God only knows who, Cornel West or somebody, I don't know who the hell, Garland Nixon, anybody. What happens if somebody gets elected that they don't want to get elected? You may have your problems with all of those candidates, and Lord knows I do, from one perspective or another. But the problems we have with them ain't nearly as big as the problems that the neocons has with them, that the system has with them. Right? It's existential to them. So they got that on the other side, that they could face annihilation at the polls. What happens if somebody gets in who's really angry with the neocons and says, let's start looking at what they've been doing? Holy moly. My God, man. What's all this money going into shell companies for all of these bastards for? And somebody starts turning over that rock. They'll all go to damn jail because they're a bunch of criminals. So they got an extra, the neocons, number one, they're crooked as a barrel of fish hooks, every last one of them. So they're afraid that somebody might start looking into what they're doing and lock them all up. Number two, it's over for the neocon project, and they got to try to continue to extend life in it as long as they possibly can. Someone says, don't hold so much faith in elections. I got no faith in elections. Zero, none. I'm just saying, from the perspective of the neocons, I'll put it like this. It's a lot harder for them to steal an election. You know, if they're losing by like 90%, now they got to like go into the machines and they got to say, hey, what's happening? Well, the guy you doesn't want got 99% of the votes and your guy got one. Well, can we possibly flip it and make it 51 to 52? Well, the exit polls shows 99 to 1. Okay, we'll flip it and make it 52-48. You know, get a little bit obvious there. They got issues. Trust me, they got issues that they don't want to have to address. They want it to be close enough that they can steal it. If it's 51-49, it's a lot easier for them to steal than if it's 99 to 1. So no, I don't have faith in elections. I'm just saying the neocons don't want that kind of problem. They don't want a possibility of getting exposed. They don't want the possibility of getting investigated. And of course, they don't want to have to face the reality. Look, the reality of the world, because if you're a neocon, your raison, what is it called? Your reason for living, right? Raison d'etre is to rule the world. It's like that old Pinky and the Brain. We used to have this show in the US called Pinky and the Brain, and there was these two mice, and they were in this lab. And at the beginning of the end of the beginning or end of the show, every time the stupid mouse would say to the ingenious mouse, "What are we going to do next week, Pinky?" A brain, and the brain would say the same thing we do every week, Pinky. We're going to come up with a plan to rule the world. So every week, the brain, which was the smart mouse, came up with a plan to rule the world. Pinky was an idiot, and they tried to enact their plan, and it never worked. But that was raison d'etre. So this was their reason for living, their reason for existence. What happens to the neocons if it becomes obvious that they ain't ruling the world? Their reason for existence disappears. And might I ask, somebody might start asking them some very, very uncomfortable questions. And their think tanks, their military industrial, all the things they use to line their filthy pockets and feather their stinking, rotten, filthy nests could come around. So it could return. So at any rate, I got to get ready to run. Oh, wow. I was on for 48 minutes. Well, that's longer than I thought. All right. Thanks. Somebody said, Sparky says they try to make election results look plausible. They ain't even doing that anymore. They ain't even worried about plausibility. Their plan is now, hey, who are we running against? That guy over there. What can we charge him with? I don't know. Mopery on the high seas. What's Mopery on the high seas? I don't know. We'll charge him with it anyway, for God's sake. Why would we charge this man with everything we can? So they don't try to make them look plausible anymore. They simply try to take their opponents apart. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Don't forget, share this. I'm not on Twitter anymore. So share this on all your Twitter accounts, etc. Also, go to rockfin.com/Garland Nixon and become a member, just in case I get thrown off of YouTube. Like I have, I'm still paying for my Twitter account. Twitter just decided I can't access it, and I haven't gotten my suit written up yet for them. But at any rate, so, what was I going to say? Oh, last but not least, buy me a coffee is a great option. Buy me a coffee. You can just say, I want to buy Garland Nixon coffee, $5. And you can then say, it'll say how many coffees. And you can then say, hey, I want to do this monthly. And it'll allow you to register to be a monthly subscriber and buy me a coffee, just like Patreon. And Patreon is an option. Cash App, all that info is there. So thanks a lot. Rockfin.com/Garland Nixon costs nothing to become a member. Zero, not a nine, etc. But if you can afford it, you can become a subscriber for the channel for $14.99 a month if you can afford it, and you sign up for a year. To give you a couple months free and knocks the price down. Thanks a lot, everybody. Got to run to work. Share this, everybody. I got to go. I'm interviewing Mark Sloboda and Dan Lazar. I'm interviewing Dr. Gerald Horn. I'm interviewing Dr. David Walalu from the Geopolitics and Conflict show. Got a lot of great people to interview today. Thanks a lot. Peace. Sonia says, your people love you, Garland, big time. Thanks a lot. I don't know. And I love my peeps too. Peace. I'm out.